I wanted to write a Western because I have wonderful memories of watching the old Westerns, John Wayne and Gary Cooper and everything with my dad. So I thought, and fiction was definitely something I liked. When I started to write this book, the stories just popped into my head and the characters popped into my head. And it was almost like a video was playing.
Hey Islanders, and welcome to episode 164 of the Camano Voice. Today I speak with an award-winning local author. Please welcome Deborah Swenson. Hi, I'm Brandon Erickson, and you're listening to the Camano Voice podcast, where I interview local business owners, comedians, singers, and more. I dive into their backstory to find out how they got where they are, what are some of the tips for you to do the same, and find out where they are going. Tune in every week as I interview more of the people you see every day. Hey Islanders, and welcome to another week of the Camano Voice, where we release a new episode every Tuesday. And I hope you guys are having a good week. Spoilers, I am actually out of town this week, but I pre-recorded this and posted it, so it's coming out this week. I'm actually in Tahiti, so hopefully I am having a good time and I'm still alive. I'm sure I'm still alive. I'm sure I am. Okay. Anyways, but just a reminder, I do have this episode posting this week, but I won't have one next week and possibly the week after, depending on how quickly I can get back on the ball and get a interview scheduled. So that's just a little housekeeping, not bookkeeping. Housekeeping for you before we jump into this episode. But hope you guys are having a good week. Thank you guys for joining me again. All right, so today I'm interviewing Deborah Swenson, and as I mentioned in the intro, she's an award-winning local author here from Camano Island, and her book, Till My Last Breath, has been released, and it won first place at the, I'm going to butcher this, Chanticleer International Book Awards Conference. And so this is book one, as I mentioned. So this is going to be part of a trilogy. So we get into this book, how she got into writing. And a couple weeks ago, you're going to remember I interviewed Brittany Tucker, who is another author. And I actually was asked by a previous guest, Dr. Ray Pope, to do a podcast where we talk about the writers group on the island. So this is apparently the year of writers, which I'm here for it because I love the idea and aspects of writing. And who knows, maybe someday I'll decide to write a book. But for now, I enjoy talking to the authors, finding out their writing process. So as I mentioned before, with Brittany, she has one style of writing process, and you're going to hear today, we're going to talk a very different, which I love that compare and contrast because everyone has their own story and their own way that they want to tell it. It kind of reminds me, I don't know if you guys will remember this far back, but when I interviewed Andy and Bonnie from Cat's Paws Bees, and then I interviewed Jennifer from Camano Island Honey. Again, different ways of producing honey. Both were very good. Andy has actually since retired from that. So, so of course that has changed. So we don't carry their honey anymore, sadly. Okay, somehow I got from book writing to honey, so I think that's my sign to jump into the podcast. So without further ado, here's my conversation with Deborah Swenson. Hey Islanders, and welcome to another episode of the Camano Voice. Today I'm here with an award-winning local author. Welcome to the podcast, Deborah Swenson.
Thank you, Brian, for having me. I appreciate it.
Yes, it's Brandon, but that's fine.
Oh, Brandon, I'm sorry.
It's fine. I also I get Eric a lot because my last name is Erickson, and so they hear Eric and they're like, Eric, got it. I'll even get in emails. I'm like, but it says it. So no problem at all. Before we get started, tell us a little bit about Deborah.
Well, Deborah is originally from the East Coast, New England.
Okay.
Came here at a very early age with my parents, and we moved to the Shoreline area. Resided there for well over 50 years in the same house.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's a lot of change.
It is. It really is. Actually, when I moved up here, I had been in that house for 56 years.
Wow.
So it was kind of bittersweet, letting go of the house, but my family was up here on Camino and Stanwood and Marysville, so I was the only one down south, and I decided it was time to make a move.
Yeah.
And I am so glad that I did. So glad. My dad was stationed out here in World War II, and he always told my mom that he wanted to move to Washington State, and thankfully he did. He said there was better work opportunities for him and actually better educational opportunities for me. So,
okay. Nice.
Yeah.
Very cool. So when did you move over here to Washington then?
Oh, I'm going to age myself here. 1958.
Okay.
So I was, you can do the math, I was 6 years old at the time. So
nice. So then what was it like for you growing up in Shoreline? And maybe just because it's back then, what was Shoreline kind of like back then?
Shoreline was almost like the island. It was very rural at the time. We still had some farmland around it. There were some ranches with horses. And we were in a small neighborhood with very few houses. But by the time that I left, it was congested and traffic and yeah. So
yeah.
But it was fun in the early stages. It was very, very fun. So
yeah.
Good place to grow up.
Yeah, for sure. So then growing up there, was there anything that led you to writing at that time? Was it something you enjoyed in school and things like that?
I don't think so early on, in my grade school or even in high school at the time. I loved to read. I was a voracious reader.
Yeah.
And writing actually came to me more in college, specifically because you had to write.
Yes.
You had to write papers. You had to write a thesis. But for early stages in my life, writing wasn't even considered at the time.
Okay. Nice. What were your kind of things that you were looking at as you were in high school and stuff that you were looking ahead towards?
I wanted to be a nurse. Always had. Right out of high school, I went to Shoreline High School. I went into Shoreline Community College, got my prerequisites, and graduated from there. Got a job at, which was then Stevens Hospital in Edmonds. It's now Swedish.
Okay.
Edmonds. And worked there for a while, went back, got my bachelor's degree at Seattle Pacific University, and then got my master's degree in nurse practitioner.
Okay.
So, been a nurse for 47 years before I retired.
Okay.
So,
nice.
Excellent career, thoroughly enjoyed it.
Yeah.
Wish I was still doing it, but
yeah.
Not in this stage.
Right.
So.
Yeah. Well, and it has, nursing has gone through so much in the last,
yes.
I mean, especially in the last 3 years now at this point. But even leading up to that, I think that just highlighted some of the things. But there was issues within it before then that it wasn't, we weren't as solid as we thought we were on a lot of things.
Right. I mean, quality of healthcare kind of took a drop a little bit because staffing issues, administration issues, which was totally ongoing. But the nurses as a whole and the other ancillary staff gave 110%.
Yes.
So I can say that if anybody is interested in becoming a nurse or going into any other healthcare career, do it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's well worth it. And I retired just prior to COVID.
Okay.
So, in that respect, I was kind of fortunate, but it was a little bittersweet, too, at the time that I couldn't be able there to help out. So.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. So then, you had a nursing career. During that time, were you also dabbling in writing or?
I was. When I worked early in my career, I would write guidelines, protocols, develop graphing and everything to make care smoother and easier to, be consistent, each nurse who took care of the patient. And then once I finished my nurse practitioner, I attended conferences and I got in touch with a gal that was with Advanced Nurse Practitioner magazine. And I thought, gee, this is something interesting. And I submitted a couple of my writings, which I had done previously, and they took me on their advisory board, their editorial advisory board.
Okay.
Prior to that, I had, in 1999, I wrote a manual, a nursing manual for obstetrics, published it on my own, had it printed, and one of the physicians I worked with at the University of Washington said, you really should get this to a traditional publisher.
Yeah.
She introduced me to her editor, and it was just kismet. He took it on, they published it. From there, I was able to be a co-contributor or a contributing author to 2 of their nursing texts and for 2 editions, and I was thrilled with that. So, and that kind of, I thought, you don't get rich writing healthcare manuals,
right?
Technical manuals, and you don't get rich, with writing fiction and nonfiction either. But I thought, I want to do something different. So I thought, let's try writing fiction. And I attended a conference in 2013, and it was the Romance Writers of America, and it was held in Bellevue under the Emerald City Writers group. And one of the national known authors did a presentation, and she challenged the audience to write a book in 9 months. And I thought, I'll take that challenge. I don't know what I was thinking, but I thought, okay, let's just see what you can do. So I came up here for a 2-week vacation and stayed at a family's residence here. And I wrote the draft and the first part of the book in 2 weeks.
Wow.
Yeah. And I thought, okay. And then life happened, and it got set aside, and then I'd pick it up once in a while, and then it gets set aside again. And then finally, in 2018, I went to Women Writing the West conference. It was held in Walla Walla.
Okay.
And I really got enthused about picking that book up and writing. And a good friend of mine went with me. She is not a writer, but she kept saying, you've got to finish that book. You just have to. I met my publicist there, who is now my publicist, and it's an amazing group of supportive women. So, and I finished the book.
Nice.
And at the time, because of COVID,
yeah,
the publishing industry was taking a hit.
Okay.
They were not taking on new authors. Some of them were closing shop, some of them were just laying off people, so they didn't have the staff to, do the normal editing and proofreading and that type of thing. So I thought, when I did contact a couple of them, they said it'd be 2 to 3 years, and I said, well, I've already spent, at that time, 7 years writing it, which for some authors that's not very long, but I thought, I really want to get this out there.
Yeah.
So my publicist recommended Kelly Leidick with the Story Laboratory, who is down in Arizona, and she works in coordination with Book Baby.
Okay.
So I did my research on that and decided that it was a good fit for me.
Mm-hmm.
So I was able to, work with her in designing the cover, which has won an award, and work with her in the layout, and I was very pleased with the outcome of the book. So.
Yeah.
And now I'm working on book 2, which I hope to get finished by the end of the month. So.
Okay.
Yeah.
Very cool. So then, so talk us through that a little bit. I think one thing when it comes to, I've interviewed artists, musicians, and I've interviewed some authors, but I've listened to a lot of things about writing books because it's fascinating to me. And everyone kind of has their own process. Mm-hmm. So what is your process when you were, this book spanned many years of putting it together, but what was your first step in deciding this is what I want to do and this is how I want to create it?
Well, I wanted to write a Western because I have wonderful memories of watching the old Westerns, John Wayne and Gary Cooper and everything with my dad. So I thought, you know, and fiction was definitely something I liked. When I started to write this book, the stories just popped into my head and the characters popped into my head. And it was almost like a video was playing. And don't ask me where they came from, or how I got them to Arizona in the time period, but it worked. And each day when I got up to sit at the computer, I'm an early riser, so I'm usually at the computer by 5.
Wow.
So I can do about 4 hours before life really starts. It just flowed. It was just really, I don't know, it seemed easy at the time.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Cool. So, as you were writing that story, did you always know you wanted to make it a trilogy or make it longer?
In the beginning, no. It was going to be a standalone book.
Okay.
But my publicist recommended a trilogy because people are more interested in following a continuing story.
Right.
Which made sense. And so what I did with this book is I introduced the 2 characters that would be the main characters in book 2 at the end of book 1.
Okay.
So it was kind of like you could really just follow the flow.
Yeah.
And I'll do the same thing in book 2. I'll introduce the 2 main characters for book 3
Okay.
at the end of book 2.
Yeah.
So
Very cool. So then in writing, what is your, I guess in this new book that you started, how long has that writing process been for you?
Well, I started outlining, which I did not do with book 1.
Okay.
I did not
Yeah.
write an outline. I just sat down and I typed, and that
Yep.
was it as the story came to me. But I did outline this one, and that was like 2 years ago I started the outline on that.
Okay.
But it has changed dramatically. So, I mean, the characters will tell you where they want to go and what they want to do.
Yeah.
So, but it really hasn't changed that much. I mean, I still get the pictures, the characters, and the videos in my head of how I want them to, evolve.
Yeah.
But there is a lot of research because this is historical.
Okay.
So in book 2, I've got the character, she has to come from Boston to Arizona.
Okay.
In the 1880s. So, the time frame of getting her transported there, it's, via train, via stagecoach. And so it's, crossing rivers, Indian attacks, and, those type of things. So
Yeah. Very cool. And then in writing the second book, have you had any of the, writer's block or anything of that as you've been going through?
I don't want to call it writer's block. I hate that term. But, and I think a lot of authors would agree with me. I have been stumped a few times, and, the mood has to be right
Yeah.
to write,
Yep.
essentially. There are days where I say, I'm just not in the mood to write. I'll go downstairs and I'll quilt. Or I'll go outside for a walk. I mean, so many beautiful places we can go here on the island.
Yeah.
And that helps, while I'm doing that, the characters will pop up and say, okay, you need to get back to me. This is what I want to do.
Yeah.
So.
Very cool. That's been something in my past. When I was a kid, we did in our school we were in, they did a writing, like a mini book competition. So your whole project over that year was writing this like little mini story.
Sure.
So I did that, and I really enjoyed writing that story. As a kid, I always had a story going on in my head. Whether that was taking characters from known universes and stuff like that, like from other people, and creating my own story with them, or creating my own story from scratch and kind of playing with it that way. Anyways, I've always enjoyed that aspect because when you're sitting down and you're writing those stories, you sit down and you realize these people, these things, they can go anywhere I want them to go.
Right. And that's the fun part of writing.
Yeah.
I mean, you have control sometimes if the characters talk to you and say, no, I don't want to do that,
Yeah.
But most of the time, you've got control of what you want to do. So,
Yeah.
yeah. And, in fiction, I love fiction because it's telling a story that's coming from your heart. And not that nonfiction is not, because I've read some amazing nonfiction with the authors. I also belong to Western Writers of America, so, it's an amazing group of people. And those that do write Westerns, historical Westerns, have amazing stories to tell. So, it's great.
Nice. So when choosing kind of your genre of what to write in, what prompted you to choose romance as kind of an overarching genre?
That's hard to say. My books have a little bit of romance in them. They're clean romance.
Okay.
So there's nothing graphic in them. And I've also, I kind of liked a little bit of fantasy, sci-fi. So I've got in here some time travel with one of the characters. And it will be in all 3 books where there is a character. And it's just something that spoke to me that needed to be written that way. So
yeah, very cool. We talked about that you picked the time period because that was something that stood out for you on a personal level.
Sure.
As you look at you got this series, are you already looking at other series that you want to write, and are you expecting those to be in the same time period, or are you going to be trying to branch and try different things?
I think I'm going to try different things. Right now, I have 2 other books that I've started, and they're more contemporary romance.
Okay.
And one is actually based in the Skagit Valley.
Okay.
And one is based in Eastern Washington. So, I am interested in writing nonfiction, but I'd like to write something in the history of Stanwood Camano.
Okay.
So,
yeah,
that's something I'd be researching.
Nice.
Yeah.
Very cool. So then, you've got this project. Talk a little bit about the self-publishing side. You mentioned Book Baby at one point. Maybe explain that a little bit, and then also talk about what self-publishing looks like in your experience.
Okay. So right now they're calling it independent publishing versus self-publishing, but I had researched many different groups and businesses that actually would self-publish for you. Some, you can see multiple things on Facebook and email, and people are reaching out to you. Oh, we'll publish your book for $10,000, or something,
right.
Whatever, some outrageous price.
Yeah.
Just sign this contract type thing, and I'm glad I shied away from that.
Yeah.
Some people have gotten burned, which is unfortunate.
Yeah.
I felt comfortable self-publishing with Book Baby because of being referred to Kelly by my publicist.
Yeah.
And she had worked with Book Baby, for several years, and felt that it would be a good fit for me at the time. And I was pleased with it. So essentially what happens, you have to have everything in the format that you want.
Yeah.
Single type, lines, paragraphs and everything like that. And then you can send it to directly to Book Baby, or you can go through, like I did, somebody that worked with Book Baby, Kelly.
Yeah.
And then they helped edit. They can proofread. They actually have cover designers that you work with. People that'll go through line by line, making suggestions of, this really would look better, especially if it's an editor that's going through it, suggesting how you would reword things to make it clear and easy to read.
Yeah.
And then you would have to approve everything, before it gets published. And then Book Baby, once they do all the publishing back, I think it's in New Jersey, send you the books. I got 100 books. Obviously, that's part of the package.
Yeah.
So when you have them published, it does cost when you self-publish, obviously.
Right.
So I got the books, and I've gone through, I think about 200 of them on self-sales right now.
Okay.
But it also, BookBaby puts you on Amazon and Barnes & Noble, and then you can order it through any independent bookstore,
Okay.
which I really recommend, to support the local bookstores in the community. Unfortunately, we no longer have one in the area, so I've been using the bookstores up in La Conner, which is great. So,
Okay.
But once you get the book, and if I'm going with Kelly, I was able to get a discount.
Okay.
So, and I believe at this time too, because the publishing industry, the big five have gone down to the big four, and now they're, as far as publishers, it's difficult to get either an agent or those that take writers without agents. They're overwhelmed at this time, being post-COVID. So I believe I'll still go with BookBaby.
Yeah.
So
It's interesting to me because I feel like there's been a lot of people who have actually maybe expanded into writing and stuff during COVID because it was something you could do at home and things like that.
Sure.
It's interesting that the actual publishing industry is not hasn't been growing in that time because again at home you can read books still if you're stuck at home.
Yeah. I think that was a confusing part to a lot of writers, authors, not understanding how the workings of what was going on with the publishing industry.
Yeah.
And maybe we'll never know.
Yeah.
So.
Yep. And then the other question is kind of with that, the music industry is having a little bit of it being turned on its head in the sense of a lot of musicians and stuff like that are finally getting out of their, or coming to the end of whatever their contracts were with the music industry, and so they're able to actually own their own music and things like that. Is that what you're seeing as far as the publishing industry is concerned?
Some of the authors that I know who were in contracts with traditional publishers have been able to acquire, their books back, so they can publish on their own, make changes if needed. But there's still quite a few of them that are held into a contract.
Yeah.
So.
Okay. So then, with obviously there's things you lose with publishing, they've kind of got the full turnkey solution of all their different pieces that they have within their house, and then they're allowing you to have access to those. When you're doing that as an independent, how are you? I guess what are the advantages and disadvantages to both sides in your perspective?
Well, I recently talked to an author who's been discussing a contract with a traditional publisher, and she's looking at, she has one, her first book was an award-winning book, and her second book, which she has been talking with this publisher, he's telling her it'll be 10 months to a year before they'd be able to get it out. Oh. So she's kind of, frustrated with that, with the traditional publishers. And, then you're under a contract, and you have to make sure that you have a literary attorney read your contract so you're getting what you hope to get, and that you're not going to lose out in the long run. Now, traditional publishing, they don't do all the marketing for you.
Yeah.
You still have to do a big portion of your marketing,
right,
like I'm doing today.
Yeah.
So, and that takes, reaching out to people, reaching out to libraries, bookstores, Now, the same thing with independently publishing. I have full control.
Yeah.
So I have no contract other than the contract I signed that they're going to print my book.
Yeah.
I had control over the cover. I had control over the layout, which with many traditional publishers you don't.
Yeah.
So, you may have a say in it, but once you sign that contract, they have the final say.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
Which, some people want. They don't want to be bothered with that.
Right.
So, I don't know too many authors that, don't want to be bothered. But I enjoyed this part. It was, it's business that we run. So,
yeah. And I think that when it comes to any of these things, it's, you mentioned the marketing piece. When we're doing these types of projects or businesses, like, I think a lot of people look for that click it and forget it and set it and forget it, and like these easy button methods to getting it done. Like, I want to write a book, I want to have a publisher put it out there for me, and I wanted to hit New York Times bestseller. Like,
we all do.
But in all of that, and even, you look at some of these like large fiction authors like Brandon Sanderson and stuff, like he's constantly putting out videos and stuff like that. At this point, he's got a big enough fan base that when he releases something, it's going to sell a lot.
Yes.
And yet he still is constantly trying to reach out and interact with his fans and stuff like that. It's kind of the new world that we're in, that you can't do mass marketing like you used to be able to, where you threw up a TV commercial and like then you sold a bunch of bars of soap. Like, it has to be the soap that fits within your, life, and so, I think that's important. But I think authors, it's all self-driven. Like in a business, it's self-driven as well, but you're interacting with customers on the retail side. You're interacting with customers on a one-on-one, like daily basis and things like that. But authors, you have to be completely self-driven in that.
You do.
And then you hit the finish line, and that's not the finish line.
No, it's not. And that's it. I mean, you really have to be self-motivated to write a book. Mm-hmm. So, and thankfully I had great support from family and friends, that kept encouraging me, finish the book, keep going, you're going to do it. But back to the marketing too, a lot of authors need to be on social media, as much as I dislike it half the time. But that's where your fan base comes from. I mean, I don't know the numbers of people that are on, on social media or Facebook or Instagram, Twitter, whatever. But, that's the place that you really promote your work.
Yeah.
So, and that, that's where we have, or I have, fortunate, to have the publicists that can help out with that.
Yeah.
So,
nice.
Yeah.
Cool. So what are the ways that you stay motivated to keep pushing forward, and especially in this independent publishing where you don't have a contract that says you have to have it by this date?
Right. I feel that I've made a promise, to myself and to the public, that I would get out book 2, book 3, and keep writing. So I have to remember, like, it's when I make a commitment to somebody, when I made it to work or somebody personal, I see it through.
Yeah.
So that's what keeps me motivated in writing. But, everybody has an off day where they just don't want to sit down to the computer.
Yeah.
So those are the days where I kind of recharge, regroup, and do something else creative. So,
yeah. Nice. Yeah. Very cool. And so then, as you're kind of looking, if you're talking to aspiring authors or new authors, what piece of advice would you give them?
I would say if you're aspiring and you've got a book in your heart, sit down and start writing. The first draft is going to be lousy. I know mine was. The second draft may be just as lousy, but eventually you'll get the flow, and you'll be able to continue writing. And on that thought too, attend conferences, mm-hmm. take classes. A lot of the community college offer creative writing classes. You could get those classes online. I mean, you can check on Facebook. There's always, amazing authors that are offering to help with their craft. So, nice. I would say, just never give up. If you have a desire to be an author, do it.
Yeah, awesome.
Just do it.
Are there certain authors that you look to for either inspiration or that have been really influential in helping you in your writing?
I would say yes, especially those from Women Writing the West, mm-hmm. and Western Writers of America. So I would say the first person that probably inspired me was the president at the time in 2018, Carmen Pion, and she lives in Chilium. There is Candace Simar, who lives in Minnesota, and there's Ashley Sweeney, who actually lives here in La Conner at times, and then she goes to, I think, down in Arizona for the winter time.
Okay.
Smart lady.
Yes.
Those are some of the women. The gentleman, I would say, is Mark C. Jackson, Thomas Claggett, Michael Ritt, Michael Farmer. I mean, all great authors, and they're books that you can tell that all of these authors, they've written from the heart, and they enjoy what they're doing.
Yeah.
So I can't thank them enough for being a good inspiration. So
nice. Very cool. And then lastly, what do you see as your future as an author?
Keep writing. Just continue to write. I believe that I have a lot more stories to tell. I know the characters are in there screaming to get out. So, and as long as I'm able to do it, I will do it.
Awesome.
So, yeah.
Awesome. All right. Well, I like to end every podcast with some rapid fire questions.
Sure.
The first one is, what purchase of $100 or less have you enjoyed the most in the last 3 months?
I hate to admit it. Fabric.
All right.
Fabric for quilting. I am a quilting fanatic. I just love it. So
very cool.
Yeah.
It's a good secondary outlet, and it also doesn't, like, you can kind of keep doing that while you're still thinking and allowing your body to.
And I do. I keep a notepad by my sewing machine, so if something pops up that, book-wise that I'm writing, then I can jot it down.
Nice.
So.
Cool. All right. Who is the most influential person outside of your family in your life?
I actually have two people.
Okay.
The first person is Pam, and we have known each other since the 5th grade and have been friends for years. I won't say how long. I mean, people can calculate it. And then the second one is Jean. Amazing woman. She's seen me through, well, they both have, seen me through good times and bad times.
Yeah.
But their support and encouragement has been overwhelming.
Nice.
And I can't thank them enough.
Awesome. All right. This is a fill-in-the-blank question. It's, I know this is weird, but I've always wanted to blank.
This is gonna sound weird. Drive an 18-wheeler.
All right. That's awesome.
I don't know, there's something about sitting up in an 18-wheeler and going down the highway that just, I don't know, intrigues me.
Yeah.
It's hard work.
It's
yeah.
Yeah. Whenever I look at it, I'm always, I'm like on the freeway. I'm like, okay, you got to like watch where you're changing lanes, stuff like that. But it's when I see them in the middle, like Seattle, parked in the middle. I'm like, there's no way.
Yeah, especially when you get between two of them.
Yeah. No way. So very cool. Who is an interesting or fascinating person that I should interview next?
I've actually got two people.
Okay.
And one is Roxy, and she is the coordinator for the Camano Island Spinners. And she's part of the Skagit Valley Weavers Guild, which I was a member of. But spinning fiber, she has got a knowledge base that is amazing.
Okay.
So the other person I would say would be Tim, who is part of the Smoky Point Desperados.
Okay.
And he is, it's a group that's dedicated to the sport of cowboy shooting.
Yeah.
And he would be both of them would be fascinating to talk to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
All right. And lastly, what piece of advice would you give your 20-year-old self?
I have no regrets for what I did. when I was a 20-year-old or, even now, I would say I had the dream of becoming a nurse. I'd say just do it all over again.
Yeah.
Yeah, most definitely. But I might be a little more, go in with my eyes a little wider open than I did in the beginning. You get this shy little 20-year-old, going to college and, and seeing things that you never imagined you'd see before, or doing things, so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very cool. Well, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast
Thank you.
today.
I appreciate it. Thanks,
Yeah.
Brandon. It's very enjoyable.
Yeah, it was good. All right, and Islanders, I will talk to you on the next one. Well, a big thank you to Deborah Swenson for joining me on the podcast today, and thank you for listening. If you haven't already, be sure to rate, review, and subscribe to our podcast on your favorite podcast platform. It really helps us be found by other Islanders like yourself. And for more information on this episode, you can go to CamanoCommons.com/podcast. That's CamanoCommons.com/podcast. Thanks for listening, and see you next time.